March 11, 1942. Douglas MacArthur stepped onto a wooden pier on Corregidor Island, armed guards flanking him, and prepared to abandon 78,000 men. He'd been ordered to Australia. The garrison he commanded, starving, encircled, dying in bunkers, would stay behind. The evacuation was secret. Only essential staff could follow. The rest would surrender or die. MacArthur boarded the PT boat at dusk and spoke 3 words to the officers watching him leave. "I shall return." 4 days later, he stood before reporters in Melbourne and repeated the phrase. The press called him a hero. The American public celebrated his escape. He'd returned, they said, to liberate the Philippines. In Washington, Admiral King read MacArthur's cable requesting ships, planes, and Marines for that return. King commanded the entire United States Navy. According to naval records, his response to staff was blunt. "MacArthur's fighting his own war. He wants us to fund a personal vendetta." The Navy said no. By April of 1942, Washington split the Pacific in 2. MacArthur commanded the Southwest Zone, Australia, New Guinea, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. Army troops reported to him. Navy ships assigned to his theater reported to him. Admiral Nimitz commanded everything else: the Central Pacific, the South Pacific, the North Pacific. Every carrier, every marine, every amphibious operation across the ocean. The split was political. MacArthur had allies in Congress and newsrooms. His ego couldn't tolerate serving under a Navy admiral. The public wouldn't understand it. But Nimitz controlled the ships that made island warfare possible. He had carriers, logistics, amphibious fleets. He couldn't, however, give MacArthur orders, so 2 separate campaigns began. MacArthur pushed north through jungles toward Manila. Nimitz drove west across coral atolls toward Tokyo. Both offensives devoured the same limited pool of ships, landing craft, and supplies. Admiral King decided who got what. And King despised MacArthur. The hatred was mutual. MacArthur's goal never shifted: retake the Philippines. He argued liberation was a moral obligation, that American credibility in Asia depended on it, that Filipino soldiers fighting beside Americans deserved rescue. Abandoning them would be betrayal. The Navy saw it differently. The Philippines were strategically worthless. The path to Japan cut straight through the Central Pacific, seize islands, build airstrips, strangle supply routes, invade the mainland. The Philippines sat off to the side, requiring massive resources for minimal gain. Better to bypass them entirely and let them wither. In May of 1943, King told the Joint Chiefs directly, "Prioritize Nimitz's drive, limit MacArthur to defensive positions in New Guinea, concentrate all offensive power on the Central Pacific." MacArthur fought back. He filed strategic reports arguing the Central Pacific approach wasted lives, that amphibious assaults on fortified atolls bled divisions dry, that his New Guinea route cost less and moved faster. Then he went to the press. Friendly congressmen received classified briefings on Navy obstruction. Newspapers ran pieces questioning naval strategy. Radio hosts praised MacArthur while attacking unnamed admirals. King received intelligence that MacArthur was leaking classified war plans to journalists, waging a political campaign to undermine Navy operations. The conflict turned personal. That same month, MacArthur requested submarine support for coastal operations in New Guinea. The Navy had subs hunting Japanese merchant fleets across the Pacific. MacArthur wanted them assigned permanently to his command, under his direct control. King refused. Submarines were strategic assets operating theater-wide. Locking them into one zone reduced their effectiveness. MacArthur filed a formal complaint with the Joint Chiefs, claiming the Navy endangered his forces by refusing essential support, that admirals prioritized turf over victory. King's reply was cold. Submarines were naval assets under naval command. MacArthur could request support for specific missions. Permanent assignment was denied. MacArthur sent more cables. He called it bureaucratic obstruction. He suggested Navy officers cared more about protecting their service than winning the war. The Navy's response? Deny his next request for carriers. In June, MacArthur requested carrier support for an amphibious assault at Leyte, New Guinea. The landing required air superiority. His land-based fighters couldn't reach the beaches. He needed flat tops. King had carriers available, but he was planning Central Pacific strikes. Carriers sent to MacArthur couldn't support Nimitz. King told the Joint Chiefs carrier support was impossible. The ships were committed elsewhere. MacArthur would rely on land-based air. MacArthur responded that without carriers, the Leyte operation would collapse, casualties would spiral, the Navy was sabotaging joint warfare. The Joint Chiefs overruled King. 2 carriers, temporary loan, 5 days maximum. Then they'd return to Nimitz immediately. King accepted the order, but limited the scope. The carriers would operate under Navy command, not MacArthur's. Exactly 5 days of support, then withdrawal, regardless of battlefield conditions. MacArthur agreed. The Leyte landing launched September 4, 1943. The carriers provided air cover. The assault succeeded with light losses. On schedule, the carriers withdrew. MacArthur requested an extension. The Navy refused. The flat tops steamed back to Nimitz's fleet. MacArthur cabled Washington, claiming Navy withdrawal endangered the operation, that if men had died, Navy officers would bear responsibility. King responded by delaying approval for MacArthur's next offensive. In March of 1944, the Joint Chiefs convened to settle Pacific strategy. 2 options on the table: MacArthur's plan, drive through New Guinea to the Philippines; Nimitz's plan, bypass the Philippines, strike Formosa or the China coast directly. MacArthur flew to Washington to argue his case in person. He met Roosevelt, the Joint Chiefs, congressional leadership. His pitch blended military necessity with political theater. America owed the Philippines liberation. Credibility in Asia depended on it. Filipino troops deserved rescue. The islands also controlled sea lanes between Japan and Southeast Asian resources. Occupying them would sever Japanese logistics more effectively than any other move. Admiral King presented the counter-argument. The Philippines were a dead end, offering no bases for invading Japan, requiring vast resources to capture and hold. Formosa offered everything the Philippines didn't: airfields within bomber range of Tokyo, ports for invasion fleets, strategic choke points for strangling Japanese supply. The debate raged for weeks. MacArthur lobbied Congress. Navy officers briefed the War Department. Competing editorials flooded newspapers. Roosevelt decided to settle it himself. He called a conference in Hawaii for July 26, 1944, Pearl Harbor. MacArthur arrived in dress uniform, sunglasses, corncob pipe, charts and operational maps in hand. He came prepared to perform. Nimitz arrived in standard Navy blues with his operations officer. He came to brief. Roosevelt opened by framing the question: Philippines or Formosa? MacArthur spoke first. He delivered his case with theatrical precision: moral imperative, strategic necessity, operational feasibility. He leaned into American credibility and commitment to allies. He closed directly: if we bypass the Philippines, American prestige in Asia will be destroyed. The people will never forgive us. History will judge us harshly. Nimitz laid out the Navy position. Formosa offered superior advantages: closer to Japan, better bases, fewer resources required. The Philippines could be neutralized through blockade and airstrikes. Occupation wasn't necessary. The direct route to Japan was more efficient. Roosevelt asked questions. He weighed politics alongside military logic. Then he decided. The Philippines would be liberated. MacArthur would command. Nimitz would provide naval support. MacArthur had won. In Washington, Admiral King received the news. His words to staff were documented in naval archives. MacArthur sold the president a political operation disguised as strategy. We'll provide the ships. He'll get the glory. The Navy would support the return to the Philippines, but they'd remember who forced it. October 20th, 1944. American forces stormed ashore at Leyte. MacArthur waded onto the beach with photographers positioned in advance. His prepared statement: I have returned. The landing dominated headlines. MacArthur owned the narrative. The Navy provided the ships, air cover, logistics, but the story belonged to MacArthur's triumphant homecoming. Behind the scenes, the operation strained Navy resources to breaking. Japanese naval forces launched their final fleet action. The Battle of Leyte Gulf became the largest naval engagement in human history. The Navy fought 4 separate battles over 3 days, sank most of Japan's remaining fleet, shielded MacArthur's beachhead from naval assault. Over 3,000 American sailors died. 28 ships sank or sustained crippling damage. MacArthur's press releases praised the liberation as a masterstroke of planning. He lauded ground forces. Naval support received brief operational mention. Navy officers read those releases with cold fury. Their ships had fought the biggest naval battle ever recorded. Their sailors had died by the thousands. MacArthur made it sound like the Navy provided taxi service. Admiral William Halsey commanded the fleet at Leyte Gulf. His assessment, recorded in post-war debriefings, was direct. MacArthur takes credit for everything and blames the Navy for anything that goes wrong. Navy hostility toward MacArthur calcified into permanence. The battle for the Philippines ground on into early 1945. Japanese defenders turned Manila into a slaughterhouse, contesting every street. MacArthur's headquarters issued daily press releases emphasizing his strategic brilliance. Naval gunfire support, carrier air cover, logistics, mentioned in technical terms, stripped of narrative weight. Credit flowed to MacArthur personally. The Navy noticed the pattern. Every major operation followed the same script. Naval forces provided essential support. MacArthur's publicity machine erased it. On February 3rd, MacArthur's troops liberated Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. 3,000 American civilians freed. The emotional impact was immense. Coverage was wall to wall. MacArthur held a ceremony, delivered a speech on liberation and resolve. Photographers captured it all. The images circled the globe. Navy officers noted the reality behind the headlines. Naval gunfire had cleared the route into Manila. Carrier planes had provided air cover. Navy logistics had supplied the assault. None of this appeared in MacArthur's version. Admiral Nimitz sent a private message to King, observing that MacArthur's publicity operation rivaled his military one in sophistication, that Navy contributions were being systematically scrubbed from public memory, that something should be done. King's reply, as recorded in his correspondence, "Focus on winning the war. MacArthur's ego is his problem. Don't engage publicly." But resentment deepened. August 1945. Japan surrendered. The question became, who commands the occupation? MacArthur was the obvious choice. He'd led Southwest Pacific forces throughout the war, liberated the Philippines, commanded public attention, wielded political backing. But the Navy had fought the Central Pacific Campaign. They'd provided carriers, amphibious might, the muscle that made invading Japan possible. They'd bled for it. Admiral King argued for joint command, Army and Navy sharing equal authority, recognition for the Navy's sacrifice. The Joint Chiefs decided otherwise. MacArthur would be supreme commander for the Allied powers. He'd oversee occupation, reconstruction, governance, virtually unlimited authority. The Navy would provide support, transport, logistics, security. MacArthur would command. King's final assessment before retiring as Chief of Naval Operations was documented in Navy records. The Army got MacArthur. The Navy got nothing. September 2, 1945. The surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. MacArthur presided. He signed first, then representatives of allied nations. The ceremony broadcast worldwide. MacArthur's speech stressed unity and peace, made passing reference to military and naval forces. The narrative: MacArthur accepting Japanese surrender on behalf of the Allies. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz signed after MacArthur for the United States. He said nothing, signed, stepped back. The Navy provided the ship. The Navy won the Pacific. MacArthur stood at the center of history. After the war, military historians began documenting the campaigns. Official histories required Army-Navy cooperation. Cooperation was minimal. Army historians spotlighted MacArthur's Southwest Pacific advance. Navy historians emphasized the Central Pacific drive and naval engagements. Disputes emerged over credit: who'd been essential, whose strategy proved correct, which service contributed more. MacArthur's memoirs, published in 1964, described his strategic vision in exhaustive detail. They minimized Navy contributions, portrayed him as architect of Pacific victory, with naval forces providing necessary but secondary support. Navy veterans read it with rage. Admiral Halsey, who'd commanded Third Fleet through the war's final year, called MacArthur's account revisionist mythology designed to inflate reputation at the Navy's expense. The dispute went public. Veterans organizations chose sides. Press coverage revived wartime feuds, command structures, strategic debates, credit for victory. Academic historians attempted objectivity. They documented that both campaigns proved essential. MacArthur's New Guinea advance tied down Japanese divisions. Nimitz's Central Pacific thrust destroyed Japanese naval power. Victory required both. But personal hatred remained. MacArthur believed he'd won the Pacific despite Navy obstruction. Navy commanders believed they'd won despite supporting MacArthur's political circus. Neither side ever yielded. The rivalry between MacArthur and the Navy shaped American military structure for decades. The 1947 National Security Act created the Department of Defense to unify the services. Instead, it formalized their separation. Army, Navy, Air Force competed for resources, missions, prestige. Inter-service rivalries born in the Pacific became permanent features of American defense. Each service developed its own strategic doctrine. Each fought for budget priority. Each battled for influence. MacArthur's Navy relationship became a staff college case study in failed joint operations, an example of how personal animosity cripples warfare. The lesson was clear. It wasn't learned. Korea saw similar disputes. Vietnam repeated the cycle. Every multi-service conflict produced inter-service friction. The Navy's hatred of MacArthur became institutional memory. Officers who'd served in the Pacific told stories to junior officers. MacArthur's ego, his publicity machine, his erasure of naval sacrifice. The narratives passed through generations. MacArthur died in 1964. Navy officers who'd served under him read the obituaries. The press praised his genius, his vision. He was remembered as one of World War II's great commanders. The Navy remembered differently. Command disputes, credit battles, publicity campaigns that erased contributions. Fighting two enemies simultaneously, Japan across the Pacific and MacArthur's headquarters for recognition. Admiral Halsey's final assessment, written shortly before his death, captured the Navy perspective. MacArthur was a great general. He was also insufferable to work with. The Navy won the Pacific War. MacArthur took the credit. That's what we remember. The Cable King wrote in March of 1942 remained accurate throughout the war. MacArthur is fighting his own war. The Navy fought theirs.